Right, okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to the first live stream for the year. Okay, so of course, wishing our, a little bit late but happy new year, and of course, hope you guys had a pretty good break from the market as well, at the end of the year, start of the year, usually market is a bit slower. We did observe that for the past 2 weeks, and just yesterday, I would say that's where the market really start having a little bit more volatility. Okay, having more movement in markets as well. Okay, and of course, this is where the week gets started, and the year also gets started from here on, right? Okay, so great to be back. And of course, as usual, what we'll be doing over here is to go through the markets, share with you my analysis, and of course, highlight some opportunities available. Okay, and then from there, we'll see if you guys have any questions. We can take a couple of questions as well. Okay, good. So let's get started with a outlook of the dollar index. Okay, and currently what I'll be looking at, and what are the kind of the nearer term direction that I'm focusing. Okay. Now, this is a chart on dollar index on a H4 time frame. Okay, and as you can see on the charts over here, the concurrent view is that we may be looking at this as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and of course, yesterday we did get a pretty impulsive move to the downside. So that kind of indicate that alright, wave 5 may have been completed, and that put us into this as a 5 wave as well. And of course, the extra layer of confluence is if we get a corrective pullback, that strengthen the probability to the downside, right? Will the dollar actually start a bearish trend? It might be, right? I mean, if you take a look on the daily time frame perspective, this move is super extended. Are we gonna see at least some sort of a meaningful pullback, maybe towards like 104, which is somewhere around the midway point, of this entire leg, or potentially if I zoom out a little bit, okay, will it be the peak of dollar here? And we start to see from a major scale, something like this, where it not only come back towards 104, but potentially maybe retest like the lows at the hundreds level, right? That is something very, very possible, okay? But of course, from week to week, as we, progress, I would say as we look at the market, on the regular basis, there's really no need for us to forecast a little bit too far into what it can happen. But what we need to just know is that, bigger picture perspective, what are the possibility, what are potential, and then we just go back to the kind of like smaller, a little bit on the lower time frame, and kind of like trade along what the market is telling us, right? So as of now, what I'm seeing here is, of course, can this be the peak? Very, very high possibility as well. But the extra confirmation, of course, is to give us a correction. That would give us obviously a potential sell trade setup. And of course, if we can jump in on the sell side for the dollar itself, then we'll just ride it along the way, right? If the market starts to suggest that, all right, it's not just a pullback, it's a really bearish move, maybe as the fundamental kicks in, and things like that, then we'll ride along, right? So for now, this week view over here moving forward is really to see if we can get a correction, and then we'll expect more downside for the dollar. Okay, now if you look at some of the common major pairs like euro dollar, pound dollar, Aussie dollar, we do see some nice confluence in terms of like dollar weakness as well, right? Okay, so you can see here this is kind of a little bit of a V shape. So of course the current market development is we don't really have a clear concrete direction, right? I mean, this is a V shape, it can come back down instantly as well. So the direction bias is turning bullish, basically means we are waiting for this. If we can get a corrective pullback, that strengthen the case of a upside, right? At least a minimum 1, 2, 3, right? So this opens up an opportunity to look for a buy trade going forward if you can get a pullback, right? And of course, then that would build into like, what is the setup you're looking at on the lower time frame. Do you look for confluences and sort of. Okay. So euro dollar, right now the direction bias is turning bullish. Okay. Very very similar is the pound. Right. You can see same thing over here. V-shaped formation. We can get a pullback. Potentially upside as well, right? And this can conclude the 5-wave structure, even as a 5th wave, on the bigger scheme of things, right? Yeah, so this too, I think it's quite clear cut. The confirmation is really to wait for the correction. Okay, you don't want to jump in and buy it immediately. The bias here is turning bullish. Once we get a corrective pullback, then the bias would then shift towards like a little bit more confident to say it's bullish. Okay, Aussie dollar also carries that, but I'm still holding on to a neutral point of view, because this move up follows a very very huge bearish candle. So it carries a little bit of a V shape, right? I mean, if you go down to like lower time frame, the V shape is very very clear. Okay, so that's where I would stay a little bit on the neutral side and give more time to the market and see how it's gonna develop from here before kind of like really decide on which direction I would be focusing on. Okay, so Aussie dollar, nothing there. Okay, I would say this one probably within the week, you won't really get much information out, from here. Okay. Then we have dollar Canadian. Dollar Canadian here. Let me just show you very quickly in a high time frame, right? I mean, from last year, we break out of this massive resistance zone. Okay. You can see that that high stretches all the way to 2022, 2023, 2023, 2024, and it will kind of break out at the end of last year. Okay. So again, we would always expect some sort of a pullback, whether is it a retracement or even, sometimes, it's just a V-shaped formation. Obviously, we won't know right now, right? But we can't expect some sort of a pullback eventually because this is a very strong move to the upside. Oftentimes, it will do some significant pullback even if it wants to continue higher. Okay, so bear in mind on a higher time frame, right? As we look down onto the smaller time frame here, we do have the perspective of this as a WX, while potentially some sort of an ABC structure, right? A tree wave. The market did respect that 1, 2, 3, but I'm not gonna just like buy into this and then expect it to go higher, right? As I mentioned on a high time frame, it provides the context where this can also be a double top structure. This is a neckline, and then we see some significant pullback to the downside. So that's the reason why this bias here is still neutral and not like bullish or not immediately a bearish move. Again, what would turn this into a bearish bias is that if we get some sort of a corrective structure start to develop, I will be a little bit more keen to obviously jump onto the sell side, carrying the higher time frame context, right, of expecting a pullback, right? I would be a little bit more cautious in buying here, okay? Unless we do get a very clear cut bounce, okay? So that's the stand as of now for dollar Canadian, right? And that's why it's neutral. Probably want to give it a little bit more time to really commit to the direction and then start looking out for the setup. Okay. So that's on dollar Canadian. Dollar yen right now, this is the view, potentially a kind of crawler structure development, and then if that's the case, we can start to look for sell side. So we do have the crawl structure nature right now. Okay, the confirmation of course is for price to start making a move down, taking out that low with momentum, and then wait for the pullback. This would give us the confirmation to start looking for sell side. Okay, dollar yen here, if you go to the high time frame, would very much can carry the same view as the dollar index, right? Which means that if today we're looking at it from a big picture perspective, this can be your first wave down, this can be a second wave up. It hasn't really break this high, right? So from here on, it can start to reverse and really go back and retest this. Okay, in a way, it carries the overview similar direction as the dollar index, right? If the dollar index really start to transit into a bearish move, then there's a good chance the dollar yen would follow suit. Okay, and my personal take is that trading the yen to the upside, which means focusing on yen weakness, is not something I would want to really be, very confident in, because if the yen were to really weaken further, the Bank of Japan might just step in again, right? Last year it did a couple of times. So and we also have like structures like this. So for me, I'm a little bit more slanting towards having a bearish bias, right? But of course, the chart needs to also confluence with the personal viewpoint that I have before I can't really commit to that. Okay, so we don't really have anything right now. That's the reason why I'm being patient for this pair, right? For dollar yen. Okay. So in short, the major pairs, involving like euro dollar, pound dollar, Aussie dollar, dollar CAD, and dollar yen, I would be patient as of now. You don't see any kind of tag here at the moment, okay? Because I think directional wise would need some time, and for that reason, the setup itself would probably not be the highest probability ones, right? So that's where I left it out. Okay. Then we have gold. Okay. Gold is obviously not very clear cut at the moment, but I'm still carrying a short term bearish bias with the expectation this to come down. But of course you can see, if I bring you to the, kind of zoom out a little bit, we are definitely in a range bound right now. Longer time frame, definitely outside, right? The question is this all it is for this 1, 2, 3, and then it starts to go, meaning this would be the entire pullback phase? Okay, or are we gonna see this entire leg here still as part of a correction of this, and then we can still get one more push, break that low, and then bounce up, right? So if you're more of a longer term kind of looking to get involved in the buy trade, this area probably not the best timing to get involved in. Not the best price point. If I were to buy, if I'm only looking to buy, I'll be interested in more of this low. Okay. So if I want to look at shorter term sell side, right? That means trading the price development itself. There is that possibility. I mean, this one can break it very, very minorly. But there's still the possibility that this is a 1, 2, 3 here. Okay, so this leg is still in control. After this tree, can this kind of climb up and break this top? Yes, right? Because structurally, this is a 1, 2, 3. Then this will be a 1, 2, 3. Okay, and if this high still remains intact, then that will give you this leg, right? To complete that 1, 2, 3, right? So that's the part where when you start to see that, right, the possibility, then of course this here, whether to sell it or not, it may not be the best, like highest probability, right? But if let's say the price starts to climb up here, right, taking out this high, and then starts to give us a setup at this area, that to me is definitely a higher probability as compared to a setup here. Okay, now I did tag this here, but I did not share this setup, or I did not have I'm not looking to take this trade setup. It's really because of the reason I explained to you guys just now, right? I mean, okay, would this work out? Maybe, maybe not. But it's not something I'll be very confident and comfortable in taking, right? So that's my view on on gold, right? On gold. Okay. So let's see how the chart plays out moving forward from here. Silver is neutral. Okay. If we continue to see some sort of an impulsive move up here, we'll start to look for buy trade direction. But for now, we don't have a clear impulsive move to the upside yet, right? So for that reason, I'm just going to be neutral on this, right? So this needs definitely more time before we have clarity in terms of the direction. Okay, so we'll leave it as it is. Silver is upside, but of course short-term bearish. Why? Because the expectation is after a completion of this kind of structure, we expect some sort of pullback, right? So short-term, that opens up a probability, a potential that we can actually capitalize on. However, while we have an overview direction here, right, of the pullback, I don't get a clear setup yet. Okay. In the morning, okay, just for your perspective and understanding of the context, right? In the morning, price was still trading here, right? So we haven't really get this move. Okay, so obviously if I kind of backtrack to where we were in the morning, something like this is not something I would want to put in any sort of a pending or setup, right? Because what can happen is price can easily just continue to drop. And then we need to keep readjusting and things like that, right? So looking at where price has developed right now, is great, okay? But I would not want to place a entry or kind of like setup at the moment. But just saying, okay, if today price starts to come back down a little bit, tomorrow morning it just hovers around like this, then it becomes a potential valid signal, or I say a valid setup to potentially consider a trade here with a stop above it. Of course, this target's below here. Okay, I mean, can you look for further targets? Yes, right, obviously. Yeah, so the setup is building, okay, but I wouldn't put any pending as of today, because the slight detail here is if we can see some sort of a mini little swing point, and then price pullback before kind of tagging our entry area. This swing point adds another layer of probability in. Okay, yeah, so that's the silver perspective. Is red flag because I'm keeping watch of it. It might build into a setup that we can look for a short-term sell, right? Yeah, so that's on silver. That's on crude oil. Okay. Then we have S&P. S&P over here is not the cleanest. There are very different takes on the U.S. equities for 2025. There's if you're in the equity side, I mean, there's one very good indicator is to follow Jim Cramer. Okay, whatever he says, more or less the opposite tends to happen. And he is very bullish on the equities, right? We kind of like, if you kind of follow his indication, means that this year equities are not gonna do well. He seems to have pretty high accuracy on that. If you go and look back at some of his tweets and things like that, whenever he says something is gonna go up, at the end of the day, the thing went down. Okay. My personal take, right? Obviously, I don't think 22.5 will be easy just buy and everything would just go up. The challenge is really because last year, the last FOMC, the Fed already hit, right? Initially, there's expectation of 4 cuts. It has reduced to 2 cuts, right? So that kind of already primed the market that it's not an full-on easing mode, right? And macro perspective is basically if it's a full-on easing mode, is actually beneficial for the equities. But because of macro fundamental policy change, reducing from 4 cuts to 2 cuts, that already put some pressure on the equities, right? It's not going to be like so straightforward, okay? But I still fundamentally believe that overall, 22.5, the equities can still end on the high note, right? Which means if you compare like start of the year, S&P is around 6,000, right? End of the year, by December 22.5, I would still believe that there's a good chance the S&P would be above, okay, where we started right now. Okay, but how is it going to develop as it starts to go higher? It might not be a easy up move only, right? I mean, market can always make a more complex correction and then start going higher and things like that. So bear in mind, that's my view on the equities in the US, right? And for that reason, I think short term here, there's still the possibility of the downside, right? I've also done a kind of like quick update in the entire equities portfolio that I have, you know, as a new year transit as well. Okay, exited some of the trades, you know, kind of like clean up a little bit of the portfolio. So free up a little bit on the capital side as well, to see what stocks are worth investing. You know, when I'm putting into equities, I don't really trade them, more towards like longer term investment. Yeah, so that's my overarching view. A little bit on the, you know, stock side perspective. Okay, so technical chart S&P, I think there's still the possibility of a downside here, but obviously there's no setup. There's nothing that allows me to take a trade to the downside. To be frank, I don't really trade the S&P anyway, right? But just sharing my view here in terms of like the 4-hour chart perspective in the near term, what I feel that the market has a chance of doing. Okay, so that's the S&P. Pound yen, V-shaped formation here you can see on the 4-hour. So I'll just leave this as neutral. There's really no need for us to really go into the details of things because we just get a V-shape. We just end on an impulse. There's really nothing we will do about it. Okay. Odd yen, very unfortunate. That trade that I took, you know, kind of share with you guys as well, did not really play out, right? Everything is pretty still valid, right? We have like this top-ish formation, we have this neckline broken, we wait for the pullback, we kind of shorted here, didn't really work out very well. Okay, but on the high time frame perspective, the bias here did not change, right? I mean, we're still in the key area, and this still be a channel structure, very very possible. So I'm still overall keeping a look for a sell, but obviously we'll then need to wait for valid sell setup, right? At the moment, there's really no setup. We are entering the key area, but there's really no sell setup, right? But what can happen over here is, suppose as market continue to develop, we start to see an impulsive drop. Okay, so we can't have a little bit of this structure here. We have an impulsive drop, break this low. Okay, then we start to wait for a correction pullback. This here would then build into a setup. Okay. So that would potentially, if I time it somewhere around Wednesday and Thursday, just rough expectation. Okay, so by Wednesday or Thursday, we might get set up on the odd yen, right? But for now, it's just in the key area, but there's really no setup. Okay. Pound Australia, I do have a potential setup over here. So on the H4, right, what we're looking at is basically the market is definitely, you know, impulsive in nature. You can see that. We have this pullback here. And of course, this pullback kind of like came into the 101.23. And a smaller time frame had a decent bounce. Okay, so that led to the perspective of this as a 3-wave potentially completed. And then can we expect more upside, right? Again, because on the hard time frame, overall, we are kind of expecting that. Okay, it's basically in a bullish, impulsive move to the upside. So very, very quickly, you know, what we're seeing here on the lower time frame is the setup, right? We kind of have this sweep, kind of a little bit of a fake break at the bottom, bounce back up, break that swing high. And of course, right now here is that we have this pullback, right? Now, ideally, I wouldn't want to be triggered in today, right? Because what again we want to see is ideally this starts to pull back a little bit, then maybe triggers in tomorrow. That would then build in this little low here as potential liquidity. Okay, and of course then that also gives us some sort of a 3-wave structure, right? Which proves to be a corrective structure instead of like impulsive pullback. Okay. Yeah, so even you can see on a hard time frame, right? This pullback here, if it's gonna tag us in today, it's not like the most ideal setup. Can it work? Possibly still. But ideally, you know, we kind of get a little bit bounce back up and then we come back down. Okay, so kind of give us a little bit of a 3-wave kind of structure. Okay, so that's on the pound odd. Again, it's red flag, right? Then we have Bitcoin. Bitcoin here, I'm neutral still, but of course recently we did get a move back up, right? And we kind of managed to take out that high, but of course I want to wait for a corrective pullback before kind of committing to it, to a bullish direction bias, right? Because this is just basically an impulsive move. If you can get a corrective pullback, then obviously we'll be starting to look for more upside. But if you don't get a corrective pullback and we just get an impulsive drop here, just be very careful, because this can be a 1, 2, and then basically a deeper pullback. Okay, again, if you take a look at Bitcoin here, if you zoom out a little bit, we have this massive run. Again, if you get some sort of a deeper pullback here, it's still overall in the bullish state, right? But you don't want to be buying in too early in a way, right? So that's my take, right? If you want to be buying it, you want to be bullish on it, wait for a corrective pullback to kind of give that confluence. Okay, Swiss yen, euro odd, right? Swiss yen, it is on a H4. Okay, so Swiss yen, I would say not the best as of now. We're in a territory that there's really no additional confluence factors, right? It's not like, oh, this high here. I mean, if this whole thing is here, then that builds a double top, right? Yeah, that's really nothing there, right? If this thing here is here, right, you can imagine, right, something like this develops here, then this also builds into a confluence of a double bottom. But this pattern structure is basically at no man's land. Yeah, I'm not very, very confident in getting a clear sense of direction, right? So this one probably neutral, I would say. The only slight bit of confluence is like, oh, you have this here, and of course the market is bouncing there. Can this starts to go higher? Possible. Okay, possible. But then it also carry equal weight to say that, oh, this is a double top. You have this neckline broken. You come back and test it. So can this comes back down? Possible too, right? So that's the reason I'm not really picking a directional bias right now. Okay. Euro odd. Let me update this a little bit. I think this was like sometime back. Okay. Okay, Euro odd, I'll be short-term bearish, right? I think the clear structure right now is we have this impulse. We can also see that this move up may have completed, and then we're kind of expecting some sort of a three-wave pullback, right? Okay, and that three-wave pullback, if you kind of put in the fib, from this low to this high, 50 marks some confluence around this structure zone as well. Okay, yeah, I think short term, my bias is definitely expectation of one more move down. Okay, now if you want to maybe consider like lower time frame setups, there isn't much of a clear setup at the moment. Okay, to be very honest, what can possibly happen here is if you want to wait for more confluence, maybe something like this. Okay, which means on the high time frame also this would develop as a 1, 2, 3 break of this high. You look for the H1 setup here, then you look for a sell trade, right? That would be the most conservative way of looking at this opportunity, right? If not, then whatever setup you have, I think, if it fulfills, whether you want to consider like looking to sell, expecting that this has completed itself, it might not be, right? Again, it's all about odds and probability in the market. Yeah, but my take is we can expect one more push down, right? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the bias here is bearish, short-term bearish, okay, for Euro odd. Okay, quick few one in terms of indices over here. Let me just scan through if there's anything worth noting. Yeah, I mean FTSE, I think it's one of the clearer ones. I think yesterday we kind of covered this in the Chinese sharing session, live stream. So this structurally is one of the cleanest. We have 1, 2, 3. If this gives us a corrective pullback, right, then FTSE presents a buy opportunity to the upside. Okay, the China market and Hong Kong market, you probably don't want to touch them as of now. Nikkei is not the cleanest. It's kind of like showing some topish tests, but again, nothing very clean over there. Aussie, you want to some sort of a corrective pullback before you look to buy. So this requires time, and I don't think it's something that is going to develop within this week. Same thing here for the Switzerland index. We did get, some sort of a bottom structure like this, very impulsive leg. Again, if you get a correction, that's an upside, right? But we need time to develop that, right? So again, nothing really significant this week. Right. This is the Singapore side, Straits Times, right? I think this is looking a little bit more of a potential crawlish formation. Doesn't mean that we're gonna get a bear market, but it just basically means that you probably don't want to be too aggressive in buying. This might pull back, come back to this area then before the bounce. Okay, so somewhere around like 3,000, I would say like 3,680, maybe about 3,640. Okay, that will be a key nice little area to consider any buy. If you're interested in sell, obviously this is not mature yet, right? You probably want to wait for that fake break, reversal sign, and then you can even go down to lower time frame and look for the setup. Right? Yeah, so that's on STI, right? So I mean, of all the index, the cleanest structure right now that I can see is the FTSE. Okay. Even the US market is not the cleanest of all, from S&P you can see that. Can the Dow Jones develop into a three-wave pullback and then one more move to the downside? That is possible as well. Okay, if you're into Dow Jones. Okay. Yeah, that can be a probable move, right? So again, if I can put in a fib a little bit here, right? Then the key area is somewhere around 43,400-ish. Okay. Yeah, so that's on the US side of things, right? So I think in terms of equities, you can keep watch on like Dow Jones as well as the FTSE. But bear in mind, these are 4 hour, right? So whether is it gonna be like completing this structure within the week, I doubt so. Okay, but you can definitely keep watch on those. Yeah, so in short, I think this week here, to me, yes, it's the second week of the year. But I think in terms of like markets, it's the first week in a way because last week, it's like literally New Year in the middle of the week itself. So think of it like market is warming up a little bit, so you don't want to be like going in, all in terms of like aggression. Take things a little bit slower as well. So yeah, for me, it's really right now monitoring the pound odd as a potential setup for this week. And then in terms of like gold is really not there for me, and then like crude oil, right? But I think crude oil, if it continues to push up like that, and kind of tag into the entry, let's say by end of today it tags here already, and then it starts to come down, then this trade is not something I'll be taking anymore, even if the price goes back up, right? But let's say if it happens like this, right, it comes down, okay, tomorrow morning it's here, then yeah, this is something that's still valid and we can consider it. Okay. But just disclaimer, I don't have a setup on crude oil at the moment. Okay. I do have a setup on pound odd, but just now I kind of explain to you guys that I would love to not get tagged in today, but if tomorrow this happens to pull back a little bit and then starts to come back, then I'll be more than happy to be executing this trade by tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, so that's a quick one, an update on what we have so far for the week. Hope that's good. I'm actually okay. It's taking a little bit of my time. I don't want to rush things through as well, but I'm actually doing a little bit of a handbook. Here, right? It's not ready. It's not completed. I'm just doing a little bit of handbook here. For the trade setup. Okay, so give you some glimpse, of like what the setups. I mean, basically we talk about all this on our weekly stream anyway. But I'm kind of building this handbook here for you guys eventually, so that you can always reference this. okay, as a trade setup, and then of course I'll talk a little bit about the directional bias, the framework, right? The DST framework essentially. Okay. I don't have a timeline on this yet. But I try like every day. I just build in a little bit of a content into that book, and then hopefully before the CNY period, which is the end of January, it's ready. Then the first launch would be more of a ebook. But then I will also start to see if we can get a publisher to get it physically printed. Then that would be great. Okay. Yep. So that's all for me. For today's session over here, I hope I can give you an good start. For the year itself, what are some of the things to look out for? Okay. Get your engine started a little bit as well. Getting back in the market if you have been like on break for the last 2 weeks. It's always good to come back, warm up a little bit. Get called like attune into what's happening in the market. Get yourself back into the zone. Okay. Then yeah, we'll get started for the year. From there on. Okay. So yes, that's all for me for today. All the best for the week itself. Let's see how the market continue to develop from here on. Hopefully we get more clarity moving forward, and we'll see you guys in the next session, right? So next week we'll continue Monday and Tuesday itself. Okay, that's all. All the best. See you guys. Bye bye.